I wanted to read to you, though, our Facebook page to see how some of you are feeling, you know, how you are feeling and how your fellow viewers are feeling about the guilty verdict in the Jason Young murder trial. Angie actually wrote to us saying, wow, am I ever glad he did not get away with this. Laura wrote, I'm so glad there's now justice for Michelle and her family. And Nicole writes, the jury decided. Were they right? Doesn't matter. I just don't think it was proven beyond a reasonable doubt. She's not alone. I mean, there are people on my Facebook page as well who are with Nicole and say, you know what? Yeah, there was a lot of circumstantial evidence, but I still had some doubts. Let me bring in trial attorney Richard Roth. That seems to be the big issue for people on social media, on my Twitter, Facebook, is, okay, yes, even some of them will say, I believe that he was guilty, but I don't believe that they proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. What do you think it was, Richard, that pushed the jury to this guilty verdict when all was said and done?
Yeah, it's always hard to read the paper or watch a little bit of In Session or True TV and get the full flavor. In the courtroom is the only place that you really have the ability to determine whether or not there's reasonable doubt. That is, looking at the witnesses, hearing the witnesses, being physically present with the witnesses. So it's tough to say whether or it's hard to really analyze these people's Facebook comments. It's just they weren't there. Mm-hmm. But there are so many things that if you cumulatively look at everything, for example, we haven't mentioned this morning, the fact that he had gone and looked up search terms of I think it was head blows and knocking a woman in the head.
Anatomy of a knockout.
He looked those
Anatomy
Correct.
of a knockout and head blow knockout.
Correct. He looked up those search terms on the internet. That is not what one does when they have spare time to go on the internet. That is one little example. And if you take everything, if you take as the judge had said earlier, he punished her. He hit her 30 times with a hard object on the head. There's no sexual attack. There's no robbery. And if you take the fact that somebody cleaned the child up from blood, because there was blood all over, and somebody actually took the time after the murder to clean up the child who was sitting there. The clothing, the whole alibi with the hotel, and the camera was first dismantled, then it was lifted up. The fact that the gas station attendant, which I think is a very important fact, at 5 a.m. saw him when he said he was sleeping. It all adds up. And if you're sitting there as a juror and you're listening and it adds up and adds up and adds up, you really have a difficult time finding reasonable doubt. The problem with us out there, particularly people who are not in the know, is that we aren't there, we aren't experiencing it. So I could easily say, I don't really see reasonable doubt, but I'm not sitting there from 9 till 5, day after day after day, hearing all of this evidence, and it does really add up. It's pretty overwhelming at the end of the day.
Yeah, they're adding it up, and then once they get all of it, they're able to go back and analyze it. We're analyzing it as it's coming in, so that's a very good point to make it, to distinguish
right. And the other huge... Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. And the other huge fact, as Mr. Cummings said, is that they had the playbook. They had defense's playbook. So there the prosecutor goes and they look at his testimony, the defendant's, Mr. Young's testimony, and they actually take it apart piece by piece, and they show that he essentially wasn't telling the truth on several different areas. On the weather, the fact you didn't have a sweater. There were 2 or 3 other areas which he testified to, the whole sports score issue. Yeah. And when they take that apart and they're able to retry it, then the jurors start saying, is there reasonable doubt, but more importantly, is the defendant lying? Because if they believe the defendant is lying, then that raises a huge issue among the jurors. And I think that's what they did at the end of the day. With the playbook of the defense, they were able to, the prosecutor was able to place it all together and to retry it and win. It is a much easier time when you know the other side's playbook, a la Blodgevich in Illinois, in Chicago, where the second time he was tried, he was convicted, than it is the first time when you just don't know what the defendant's going to do.
Yeah, yeah. You know, Susan on Facebook brought up a point that I wanted to bring up as well, and I thought it was really interesting. She said, this jury took its time, they looked at all the evidence, and then she said, it just shows you don't have to have the crime on video to come back with a guilty verdict. And I'm wondering what you think about that. Are we too reliable, or too reliant, I should say, on specific evidence these days when we know we have video? They had surveillance video here, but they didn't have video of him placing him at the house specifically. Are we too reliant on technology?
That's such a great point. We are so reliant on technology. Every time something bad happens, something mysterious happens, we happen to have somebody with a camera videotaping it, whether it's something in a Times Square incident, which happened last year, or some other type of criminality. There's always somebody taping, and you watch on TV every day. And you're right, we are very reliant on the videotape. But there's so many. The other advanced technology we've had is between DNA and other forms of testing and the ability to get scene of the crime evidence, where that has also expanded. So on the one hand, we are too reliant, I believe, on videotaping, and you didn't catch his hand in the cookie jar, essentially. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, we have advanced so far with the technology and the DNA and the ability to sort of determine where someone was, the fact that he was on searching these terms on the internet, that's helped the process. But we don't always have a video to film a murder, unfortunately.
Right, and when we don't have it, I guess I'm wondering if you think that taints people's views in saying, well, if we don't have it, then maybe it didn't happen. It didn't happen because there are so many instances where we do have that proof. Are we entering kind of a dangerous territory here?
I think we are.
I guess.
Yeah, I think what it does is it puts a higher burden on the prosecutor, because we see so many things with a videotape today that all the jurors want to do is see, well, did you catch, as I say, the hand in the cookie jar? So the prosecutor has a higher burden because there is no videotape. And 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that wasn't even in the cards. So now I think it does make it harder, and it makes it all the more reason why the prosecutor has to go through painstaking evidence from what's at the scene of the crime to the alibi and to piece it all together. I think it does make it harder for the government to put on its case because you don't have these videotapes and these cameras, which everyone walks around with. I agree with you.
Judge Stevens really, I think, moved a lot of people. And when he was sentencing Jason Young, and he said something that I wonder how much the jury really honed in on. But he said, this woman wasn't just murdered. She suffered a beating like the likes of which we seldom see. This woman was punished. Do you get that same sense about who Jason Young was?
I do. He actually even went further and said that the beating was so severe that he stopped not when she was dead, but when he was too tired. And I think the jurors, hearing that, get a little sense of relief, because it's a very big burden to determine whether someone should go to jail for life. And I think when they hear that, number one is they get a sense of relief. Wow, the judge also agreed with us. But also they get this conclusion that they've done the right thing. We've looked at it, and now the judge, essentially, who can speak more than we can, has essentially said out of his mouth what we would have liked to have said. A lot of the jurors, I'm sure they have a lot of things to say, more than just guilty or not guilty. And the judge, by going ahead and portraying that and giving what was a very eloquent speech, really spoke, I think, on behalf of the jurors by saying, I get it, jurors, and I do agree with you, and it's a shame that this beautiful young life who was pregnant was wasted on this hedonistic, just violent crime.
All righty. Richard Roth, thank you so much. Richard's sticking around with us because we want to get your views on this whole thing. Jason Young spending the rest of his life in prison. The emotions surrounding this case, its verdict, they vary on all sides, don't they?